Okay, let's go on.
In 1967, Egypt's leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, threatened to destroy Israel and amassed troops on Israel's southern border. Syria and Jordan also mobilized on Israel's northern and eastern borders. Israel preemptively attacked Egypt and Syria and warned Jordan not to participate in the conflict. Jordan ignored this warning and entered the war. In 6 days, Israel defeated the Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian armies. As a result of this victory, Jerusalem was unified, and the West Bank, Gaza, and the Sinai Peninsula came under the Israeli control.
Okay, this was amazing, literally. In 6 days, Israel won, one of the most decisive victories in military history. This, by the way, that's an iconic photo. It's a photo of Israeli soldiers standing at the Western Wall, also referred to as the Wailing Wall. They're in amazement. There's no way of looking at that photograph and knowing, are they religious or aren't they religious? What do they believe? But understand, since Israel was back in our land, again, since 1948, up until 1967, we couldn't go there. This is literally the holiest site, in Judaism. It is the remaining wall of retaining walls that were around the Second Temple. Actually, the Second Temple stood up above this on what's called the Temple Mount. And by the way, Orthodox Jews won't even go up there. You think of why? Above this, again, that's the wall, retaining wall. Up above this, the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock is up there. Al-Aqsa Mosque is up on top of the Temple Mount. Why wouldn't Orthodox Jews go there?
They not know where the Holy of Holies stood, or?
Exactly. Remember, that great. Remember, only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies once a year, and then it says he had to offer up sacrifice of blood for his own sins and for the sins of Israel. And so, because we weren't allowed to go in, remember, as far as the Jews are concerned, that veil hasn't been rent yet. Fortunately, we're able to go in every day if we choose to, but Jews don't know we can enter, and so Orthodox Jews don't want to, by mistake, even walk in the area where the Holy of Holies once stood. Okay? So this is what the border looks like. This is after, again, the 1967 war. Israel conquered a greater area. This is part of Syria, of the Golan Heights. Why was that significant? Because before this time, Syrian soldiers used to sit up there and they would shoot at the Jewish fishermen on the Sea of Galilee, which is right here, and launch missiles into the agricultural communities around the Sea of Galilee. Israel was now in control of the West Bank. Again, this is the heartland of biblical Israel. Samaria here, Judea here. And by the way, it's referred to as the West Bank because it's on the west side of the Jordan River that runs here. And Israel also not only was in control of this area, which is the Gaza Strip, but also the entire Sinai Peninsula, which had been part of Egypt prior to that, and which had lots of oil reserves in it. Okay, what I want to do at this point is just show you a little video. It gives you some idea of just how miraculous the Six-Day War was. So let's watch that.
On June 4th, 1967, the infant state of Israel found itself on the brink of annihilation. Israelis still lived with the agonizing memory of the Holocaust. Now the Arab nations surrounding Israel vowed to make the blue Mediterranean run red with the blood of Jews.
We were thinking in terms of the Israelis are going to be thrown to the water.
On the morning of June 5th, 1967, Eitan Ben Eliyahu flew one of the first missions against Egyptian airfields in the Sinai.
This is a matter of life and death. This is a matter of Israel is going to be destroyed.
People were in panic. People were talking about the imminent destruction of the state of Israel, of a war in which there will be an enormous number of casualties, at least 10,000 people will be killed.
Rabbis in Jerusalem anticipated so many deaths, they actually designated all of the public parks in Jerusalem as cemeteries. Just before the war, the joke in Israel was, last one's out, turn off the lights. But this black humor didn't mask the fear that many Israelis genuinely anticipated a catastrophe. Israel found itself outnumbered and outgunned on 3 fronts: Egypt to the south, Jordan to the east, and Syria to the north. The Soviet Union had poured $2 billion worth of arms into the Arab nations. Israel's enemies brought twice as many soldiers, 3 times as many tanks, and 4 times as many airplanes to the battlefield. But just before the war, Egypt, Israel's main enemy, suffered a series of major mistakes and mishaps.
There was this miscommunication between the president, Nasser, and his top generals, and everything didn't work according to what they thought. And when the war broke, you could see and hear, which we did. We heard them. You could see and hear that the Egyptian High Command was not in control.
Egypt's High Command also dismissed warnings by mid-level Egyptian intelligence officers of an imminent Israeli air attack. The night before the war, Egypt's commander-in-chief, Abd Amir, gathered his high command for a party at an airbase far away from the front lines.
They were caught by surprise, totally. I mean, some of them were trying to take to the air in order to join their units. They couldn't do it.
2 weeks before the war, Egypt replaced nearly all of its commanders in Sinai with officers unfamiliar with the terrain. On the morning of June 5th, Jordanian radar detected the Israeli Air Force taking off. They sent a red alert to Cairo, but the decoding officer used the wrong day's code and failed to decipher the vital information. The warning never came. Instead, the Israeli Air Force decimated the Egyptian Air Force on the ground, the key to the outcome of the war. Some, like author Sarah Rigler, who's written on the Six-Day War, believe this series of Egyptian mistakes reveals the work of an unseen hand.
You can say, oh, wow, what a lucky coincidence. Or you can see the divine hand. We see that God arranged all these things to happen the way they did because he wanted the Israeli strike to succeed. He wanted us to win. He wanted us to regain our holy places.
To some, the confusion in the Egyptian command just before the war evoked memories of the biblical story of Gideon routing the enemies of Israel. Instead of annihilation, Israel won one of the most decisive victories in military history. Many Orthodox Jews and Christians believe the Jewish nation had witnessed a miracle.
For evangelical Christians, the Six-Day War was a huge moment of seeing God's hand intervene on behalf of the Jewish people. I mean, that really was, I think, so extraordinary, is that you had this moment where Arab leaders, Islamic leaders, were saying we're going to throw Jews into the sea, and it looked like another Holocaust was imminent, and suddenly, in 6 days, the Jewish people defended themselves, destroyed their enemies, tripled their land, recaptured control of Jerusalem for the first time in 2,000 years, and on the 7th day they rested. That just sounded way too biblical for evangelicals all over the planet, and they rejoiced with the Jewish people.
In the immediate aftermath of the war, everyone, religious and secular alike, recognized that this was from God because it was just so implausible. I mean, here everybody was expecting a tremendous defeat. This is a miracle. Even Moshe Dayan, who was the commander of the Israeli forces and who was a very secular person, he went to visit the Western Wall the day after it was liberated, and there's a tradition to put, put little notes to God in the wall. So he put a little note to God between the crevices of the wall, and of course as soon as he left, the newspaper men in their typical discreet way ran and took the note out and read it. What did it say? And it was a line from Psalms that said, "This is from God, it's wondrous in our eyes."
How many of you knew most of that? None of it. No? Pretty interesting. Okay. Okay, would somebody read the next sentence, please?
Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt as part of a peace agreement concluded with Anwar Sadat and signed on March 26, 1979.
Okay, so basically, and this is a peace agreement that's held between Israel and Egypt up till this point. It's not a warm peace, like kissing cousins or whatever, but nevertheless, it's still a peace agreement. And again, for Egypt to agree to that, Israel gave back the entire Sinai Peninsula with all of the resources, oil resources that were there. What we're looking at here is a photograph it's an iconic photograph of Anwar Sadat on the left, Jimmy Carter in the middle, Menachem Begin on the right. Anwar Sadat, of course, was the leader of Egypt at this point, Jimmy Carter, the President of the United States, and Menachem Begin, the Prime Minister of Israel, when Israel entered into this peace agreement with Egypt. And this was actually preceded, this is actually miraculous, was preceded by a visit by Anwar Sadat to Israel. Up until this time, again, all of the Arab leaders in the Middle East didn't even agree to Israel's right to exist at all. Anwar Sadat, I don't think, was particularly happy that Israel was there, but he also realized this is a reality. Israel's not going anywhere. So he decided to visit Israel. It's sort of interesting how this came about. How many of you are familiar with Walter Cronkite? Okay, you don't even have gray hair, but anyway, Walter Cronkite used to be, a commentator for CBS News, a very, very famous guy, and apparently he was interviewing Anwar Sadat, and in the interview, Anwar Sadat said he was willing to visit Israel. And so Walter Cronkite got on the phone again to the leaders of Israel and said, hey, you guys, you need to invite this guy, he'll come. And so he did. He made this visit on November the 19th, 1977. It's a very short flight. It probably took about half an hour to get there. Arrived at Ben Gurion Airport. Israel was so thrilled, that an Arab leader would even recognize their right to exist, that you had all the dignitaries in Israel there at the airport to greet him. They gave him a red carpet greeting. Then they took him to the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament. He spoke before the parliament, was received, I think he was received with a standing ovation. I can't promise you that. Out of that came this peace agreement. And when Israel made the peace agreement, once again, they agreed to give back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. So, this is what we've got. And this is, by the way, this is critically important to understand this map. I think Scott said he was really excited about seeing maps, so you should be very excited now. Okay. So at the end, again, of this peace agreement, Israel had given back all of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. So that was part of Egypt before the '67 war and is today. Israel maintained security control, never annexed, but maintained security control of the Gaza Strip. Israel also, remember, this had been under Jordanian control. Also, Israel maintained security control of the West Bank and of this area of the Golan Heights. This, again, if you're going to understand the politics of Israel today, you need to understand this map, because this area is Israel proper. I don't know, what color do we call that? Someone help me?
Burnt orange?
Okay, whatever. We can't call it flesh tone because all of us have different flesh tones. But but this area is Israel proper. Israel, again, is controlling, as far as security control, these other areas. Understand this, by the way, and this goes back, we're going to talk about this later. The Palestinians who are living in this area, do you know that 20% of the citizens of Israel are Palestinians, are of Palestinian background, are Arabs? Those that are living in this area, they're Israeli citizens. They have all the same rights as all the other citizens of Israel. And these are the same freedoms you would expect in a Western democracy. The freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, due process under the law, all of that is afforded to those Palestinians. Now, in 1993, Israel entered into an agreement with the Palestinians called the Oslo Accords. This was supposed to be a phased plan, a peace plan that would lead to a final agreement. Under that agreement, Israel gave administrative control to the Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. So at this point, the Palestinians that are living in this area and the West Bank are under the control of the Palestinian Authority that came out of the PLO that had been established by Yasser Arafat. And in this area, they're under the governance of Hamas, which is a recognized terror organization. And understand that the lives of the Palestinians here in Israel And the lives of the Palestinians here and here are entirely different. The Palestinians living under their own government here have none of those freedoms that we talked about. They don't have freedom of religion. Literally, if you're a Muslim in that area and you happen to convert to Christianity, you can be killed. You don't have due process under the law. Palestinians that are living in that area can be arrested, even tortured, and in some cases even executed without due process of law, without a trial. They don't have freedom of the press. The first thing that Yasser Arafat did when he came into that area and took control is he took control of all the media. And in Gaza, it's even rougher, because in Gaza, the people living there are under the control of Hamas. And again, they're an Islamic terror organization. So understand, and we'll talk about that more, that the lives of the Palestinians that are living here, those Palestinians are suffering much more. In fact, the Palestinians living in Israel are not really suffering at this point, but suffering so much in those areas and also in the countries that are surrounding Israel. So we will talk about that. Okay, next.
From that time until today, Israel has maintained security control within the 1967 borders, including Sinai. As a result of the 1993 Oslo Accords, Israel granted administrative control to the Palestinian governing bodies over Gaza and the majority of the West Bank.
So that's really what we just covered. Okay, would somebody go on, please?
Including the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, 10,333 square miles of land are currently under Israeli control. The Arab/Muslim nations of the Middle East possess 8.4 million square miles of land. The land controlled by Israel is approximately 0.1% of the land possessed by the Arab/Muslim nations of the Middle East.
Okay. Now, I just want you to understand this, to understand a little bit of the miracle of the fact that Israel is even in existence today. Israel, in essence, is surrounded by 340 million people that would like them to end up in the Mediterranean Sea someplace, okay? And that's not, I'm sure there are those within those countries that don't feel that way, but in general. So just, if you look at this map, again, if you're influenced by international media, you might think, the battle in the Middle East is really over land. I don't really think it's really over land. Israel, by the way, is about the size of New Jersey. It's smaller than El Salvador. When you think about the conflict in Israel, just understand it's not primarily over land. I personally believe it's primarily over the things that we're talking about. That God is doing something powerful there, through which, again, He is going to be glorified, and there are many, many forces pushing back against that. And I want to say this, and we'll talk about it more, and I know I mentioned it before. Please don't misunderstand this, and in the sense that we don't have compassion for the Palestinians. As I said, God loves the Palestinians, and they are suffering terribly. And I think the world needs to be concerned about, but we also need to understand where they're suffering terribly, and we're going to get to that as we go on.